and lovely to see you again. So here we are in the East End, Maggie, and I want to tell the sort of people in Poland about Covent Garden. It's probably the most prominent street theatre venue in the world now, but wasn't at one time. It was just a fruit and vegetable market, and somebody had to start all this business off, and I think you had something to do with that.
I did a bit, John, yes. Yeah. We'd been in Covent Garden, and we were based in a huge old empty basement, which was a kind of club, which had been used for all kinds of extraordinary raves and things like that. And we were based down there and known as Alternative Arts. We were a network of artists working in different ways. And at the same time, we became involved in the fight to save Covent Garden, because there was a whole plan to bulldoze the area, basically.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I mean the Central Market buildings, the beautiful old buildings that now stand in front of the portico of the St Paul's Church, which is the fruit and veg, the market. That was all scheduled to be pulled down, and a massive conference centre was supposed to be built.
That's centuries old, isn't it?
Yes, but it doesn't matter, does it, if you want to do something? Anyway, and quite rightly, the community that lived there felt this was not a good idea. Luckily, round the corner and up the road is a bunch of is the Architectural Association. So a whole load of young architects from there thought this was a terrible idea to pull this down, and so they got together with local people and artists and people and recruited people like us and stuff that were based around there, and said we need to fight this off, and we need to fight the Greater London Council, we need to fight the government, we need to go for it. And of course, being very young and quite naive, we had no fear. So we just fought them. We just fought them off. We just said we did everything we could. We ran huge campaigns to save the area and got massive support, and in the end won, which was quite a surprise. But of course, what happened as a result, the old buildings were then boarded up all the way around the centre of Covent Garden, and the place was as dead as a dodo, because all the fruit and vegetable people had moved out. Prior to that, I mean, the whole place, every morning, from all night, there was lorries coming in and out and vegetables being thrown everywhere.
That was a good place to go and get a late night cup of tea or a drink.
Or not just late night, it's a good place to have a fantastic pub, steak in a pub for early in the morning, because I mean that was.
I wouldn't know about that. Sort of stuff,
I would, because there we were running this club when it was really late at night, and so we'd get up in the, sort of, they'd be there working all night, and then you'd go off to the pubs and have this huge, and also all around the area there was, as I say, there was all these stalls and everything was fruit. It all went really dead, and of course that had been happening there for over 300 years. So it was pretty devastating, because in the community there, the people that lived in Covent Garden, they'd either worked in the fruit and vegetable market, or they worked in all the theatres. They were the doormen, the firemen, the flymen, they were the workers in all the theatres that are in the area. So you had this fantastic sort of community, which was quite unusual and
amazing community.
Yeah, and very interesting. And so I was there, and I sort of saw this whole place get completely dead, and I thought, first of all, we had to have a celebration of the fact that the market was going. So we got fairground stuff, we got all sorts of people coming and everything, and all around the whole market area we had a big celebration to say goodbye.
Well, she'd have been really good at sourcing all that kind of stuff, because you had a career before that with Pinewood Film Studios.
Yes.
Worked on the Bond films.
You found me out. Yes,
I
had been working in the film industry, and also I'd been working down in the East End of London, where I'm now still based, and working on the whole idea of, yes, I worked in the film industry for quite a long time. I worked on design and everything, and at the same time I'd started a small film unit in the East End, And that was actually quite important to me because working with lots of young people and getting them to make movies. And at the same time, again, you're in touch. There's a whole community here, and how were they going to be communicate with each other? So we started having festivals on bits of open scrub grass and getting together with music and having sort of beer tents and fantastic dancing and stuff like that. I really like that kind of open air, free entertainment idea.
So everybody does, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah, and it's that whole idea of it being really accessible to everybody, and that's how really when we were in Covent Garden you could see that okay, this whole place emptied out, all central buildings were boarded up, and what was left was this empty space in front of the church, which is St Paul's, which has a magnificent portico, which if you only got to stand in front of it and see that it is a theatre. Right, it has a fantastic proscenium, amazing columns, it's just there. And I was standing there looking at it one day and my eyes wandered to this plaque on the wall, and it says that it commemorates the first sighting of Mr. Punch in England in May 1662 by Samuel Pepys, who was a great diarist of London life. Now Punch is from Punchinella, which is the Italian commedia dell'arte character, and that is open air theatre. And I thought, this is what we have to do. We have to have some theatre here. And my great love of theatre. I'm trained as a theatre designer, so I just thought, yes. So I went and knocked on the door of the vicar and said, would we be allowed to perform under your great portico? And luckily, this lovely, lovely man called Rev John Arrowsmith said, oh yes, Maggie, absolutely. He taught at the Arts Educational School. He was totally into the whole thing, and he completely thought it was a lovely idea. And so we started very simply, whilst the whole area was boarded up in the middle, under this portico, we invited street theatre groups that I'd already knew from working on festivals and things like this, all over the East End. So, that was great. And I just started to invite them to come and perform. And they used to sort of like perform for a whole week. And there'd be a show every lunchtime. And at the same time, the Greater London Council, whom we had defeated, had to sort of start becoming our friends because we were there still. And so I persuaded them that it would be brilliant if you could let me have some paint and a few brushes. And we rode off to play groups all over London and invited them to come and paint the hoardings all the way around the market with lovely images. And then at lunchtime, so all these kids used to come, at lunchtime they used to sit down on the street and watch the show. So we had these audiences, plus there was this magazine in London which is called Time Out, who we also knew well, the people who worked on that, and we used to say, well, can you publicise that we get this lunchtime theatre? And we used to write that all you had to do was bring your sandwiches and a pint of beer, walk round the corner and enjoy the show. And people did exactly that, which was wonderful.
I love the way beer is featuring in this.
It's very important thing to get people to feel, and literally you'd see them with a rolled up copy of Time Out under their armpit, a pint of beer and some sandwiches, walk round the corner and go, oh, show, fine, sit down, bunch of kids, have a good time. And from that...
Who were the main audiences then? Because it wouldn't have been tourists, would it?
No, it was people in London who really liked the idea, local workers, local people, the kids that came from there on a little outings, things like that. No, Covent Garden did not have tourists in those days. I mean, it's unbelievable to people now. But inevitably, what was interesting is you had this area which was completely its own place, right next door to the West End, and the whole tourist thing of London, Trafalgar Square's just down the road, Leicester Square's just up the road. It's just that, but it was inevitable that it would get that. But for 5 years, it remained hoarded up, and what we did was animate that area and develop this idea of the street theatre, which grew and grew and grew. And we had extraordinary shows and really some very good, hard-edged, cutting political theatre.
Well, I remember going along, that's when I first met you, I was with the Incubus Theatre Company there, which sort of had that kind of edgy political thing going on. So in the early days it was mainly sort of small theatre companies,
yes,
as opposed to
absolutely
individual street performance
Yeah,
shows.
well, that was what I knew. I knew about theatre, I knew about street theatre, I knew about that. It was that I called upon, and it was also that we could work with at the time. It wasn't an ad hoc place whereby you could just turn up, do a show, get some money. It was that came later, but at that point it was programmed properly, and we also got some funding from the Greater London Council for doing it, so we could actually pay the theatre groups a little bit of money, which was great for them. And so we began to build that up, and as it grew, we had, as I say, shows like you described, but also shows like feminist theatres like Beryl and the Perils, for which I got into a great deal of trouble, because there they were standing out in the public arena discussing the plight of women when going to the clinics or whatever they were, but strong, good, gutsy stuff, and people writing letters of protest, how dare these women say these things in the street, and at the same time local policemen creeping around and saying, we support your theatre group, which I thought was always very lovely. We also had a lot of, it's funny how when you live on the street and you work on the street, you get to know street people. In that area there were 4 doss houses, which meant there was a lot of traps, homeless people on the street.
Just for the people in Poland that are listening to this, could you explain what a doss house is?
A doss house is a place where homeless, mostly men actually, so homeless men can go to find a place to sleep at night. And they're kindly places where you can usually get a bit of something to eat and a bed. And Covent Garden was famous for its doss houses. I mean, one of the very first theatre pieces we ever presented was called Mud Salad, and that was put together by a scratch group who called themselves the Covent Garden Community Theatre, and they did research into the history of the area, and their first show was called Mud Salad. And Mud Salad was that when the fruit and vegetable market was there, and it was all closing up at night, underneath the portico at that time there was great pitted areas in the pavements, and that's where, and fires were lit by homeless men, and they'd sit round and they would pick up any bits of salad off the ground that had fallen from the stalls that were usually covered in mud, and that's what they ate. So they ate what fell off the stalls and they lived there, and it was a very interesting and dramatic, and if you understood it, and as I say, if you work in the street you get to know all kinds of street people who work, that clean the street, and women that work the streets, and there's a whole life in the street which a lot of people never experience.
This is an amazing picture that you're painting here, because this is so different to the image people now have of Covent Garden. So this was all sort of happening around the 1976?
Early 70s, yes.
Early 70s.
Early 70s, yeah. And I think that is, as I say, the theatre of the street isn't just the performance, it's also the people within it. And in fact, I had come from a cinema tradition making films, and if you like, that theatre is the cinema of the street, because it's constantly moving. You're creating moving images, moving things, and that's what happens. And at one moment, this piece of street is a theatre. Once it stops, it's gone. It's still. It's not there. So at one point it's a theatre, and the next minute it's not. And that I love, that kind of magic, and then the idea of theatre being a magic space. Whether you're within a dark space or with open air, it's a magic space at any one time, and something quite magical and different is happening. And it's also very Brechtian, the whole thing, because you see the whole way of performance, warts and all. You see actors getting ready, standing behind the curtain, getting on, putting things, coming off. You see the whole preparation of it, and the audience love it. They are completely part of the show. And in fact, many theatre groups recruited huge numbers of members of the audience to be part of the show. Like Patrick Barlow, for instance, actually do the charge of the Light Brigade. Every single member of that audience became the part of the charge. It's just one of those wonderful things which you can, and people working off the audience all the time, and shows like that, very, very important types of street theatre. Anyway, this happened, as I say, for 5 years, and then the hoardings came down, and all the Central Market buildings had been created as a shopping mall. all looking very Dickensian, all exactly alike and everything very twee.
Very neat and tidy.
Very neat and very tidy and very unlike what there had been before. And so we knew we were now entering, we dived into the areas of bourgeois culture, and inevitably hundreds and thousands of people would come. And in fact, I was summoned by the council and spoken to about the whole idea of the street theatre, and could I clean it up a bit, because lots of visitors would be coming. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, those African drummers, they were a bit noisy and things like this. And I go, well, yeah, it's too bad, that part of what we do. And so there was a definite attempt to try and clean up the act a bit. But the thing they really wanted to see was how it would develop. And I said, it's fine, and we can start. There are plenty of performers who would like to come and do a show there. And that, like from day one, it just, boom, we just began.
1980.
Yes, absolutely. It just sort of took off completely, and it was very interesting, because sort of people started coming from all over. The word got out, as it would do in terms of street, because the word is on the street, and that word, and so, there was people coming and they were doing tightrope walking and stilt walking and juggling and all the sort of magic and all those sort of acts. And then there were memorable street acts, which I remember very well, because they are actually performed by actors who've worked out a persona, and not least one John McKenna, who used to emerge from the public toilets next door to the portico of the church in a wetsuit with flippers and a bucket of water, and berate the audience. Now, people were fascinated. Where was this going to go, and what was going to happen? But it held the crowd unbelievably, and it was just a magic act, John, if you remember. And the other act, which I completely adore, was another guy called Phil Herbert, or Akar Randolph the Remarkable, who had a very large stomach and devised a wonderful act whereby he kept the audience absolutely on tenterhooks as to what was going to happen, ending in his stomach diving into a washing up bowl full of water, which he then stood up, which it then stuck to his stomach. Now, this sounds simple, but it was hilarious. He still does this act to this day. I'm very pleased. Although once he went on a diet, and that was fatal.
I saw Philip a couple of weeks ago, and believe me, he's back to his usual.
We know, yes, and I will be witnessing his act very shortly again. But these people, and you can imagine how, out of that whole piece of street theatre given. And what happened was, we were charged with the responsibility for running it. Now, this is a difficult task. You'd think, oh, that's be simple. But no, if you don't understand street performers do not want any regulations. They don't want to be told what to do. They don't want to be told what time to go on. They don't want to be told anything at all. Also, they're mostly male. So you have a whole thing about confrontation and that sort of Bacco kind of, I can do what I want. And so it took a group of women, it was me and other women, and we, as our arts organisation has always been run by women, and we were charged with the responsibility of running it by the council. And we said, well, we needed a space somewhere to organise from. So we had a basement of a building next door to the portico, which we held out as our so-called office. And we had a team of stage managers 7 days a week. 7 days a week, absolutely. And it was because we were on duty, because it's such a popular pitch did it become, that there was always performances there. And what we had to do was get up early in the morning and be there to take down the list of performers that wanted to perform that day. And if we weren't there, and if we didn't do that, then there'd be a few performers who absolutely hogged the whole thing and were kind of like real bully boys. But we seriously wanted to encourage new performers, give people opportunities. We're an arts organisation. We wanted to see what people could do. We wanted to care about them. And we wanted variety as well. So we wanted there to be every kind of performance and dance and music and so on. We also relished performers, some of which were really bad. So, for instance, there was a guy who played the squeeze box. He did sea shanties, and they were terrible. And I loved it because the moment he started performing, he emptied the piazza. And I thought it was fantastic.
I remember him.
Yes, and other performers would complain about him and everything, but the fact was that the contrast, how would you know if anybody was any good if you didn't see anybody bad? Yeah. You know, and who were you to judge anyway?
Anyway, he wasn't bad, he was just...
No, he was just what he was, yes, but it wasn't popular. And so, but it did the trick, and it was important that people like that were performed as well. And also, we did try to encourage women to do it, and we'd need to protect them because, quite honestly, that was quite difficult. But we were very fair, and we always made sure that everybody had an opportunity for a good spot. And we did this for years. And what was fascinating is we even had to do it on Christmas Day, and even in the snow. You know, that's how popular it became.
I can remember at one point there where we were, as performers, we were arriving there at 2 and 3 in the morning and sleeping alongside with the street people, just so we could get our name on the list. And then some fairer system came in, and I can't remember what it was, but...
Well, that was us coming in to actually... Well, I mean, no, I don't know whether that... Yes, no, I think you couldn't... You had... No, I think you did have to turn up. Yes.
Yes, but it meant that people were turning up at like 2 in the morning. Some people were saying.
Yeah. Did we then relax the rules and did we let you book ahead or something?
It was first come, first served, and I think that was a bit unfair for people that had lived further out. So I think it went to drawing it out of the hat or something.
That's right. Yes. What we did. But what we also made sure
I digress.
Of. What?
I digress.
Yes, probably. What I'm saying is that what we were there for was to make sure that everybody got an opportunity. So yes, you're quite right. People were queuing up to be there first thing in the morning to get the best spots. But we would say, I'm sorry, we're not going to sort it out till 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning, and that's when we're going to do it, just because you're there. And we're going to make sure that if Ozzy didn't get a spot at 1 o'clock yesterday, he gets one today, and so on and so forth, because we were also looking at sort of things like whole street crews and body popping and things like that were developing, and all sorts of new kind of styles and forms were beginning to come along, not just the traditional acts, and that was really important to us to show that diversity. And we got kids coming who sort of threw 3 or 4 balls in the air and dropped them and said, I want to be a juggler. And what do you think? And we say, go away and practice and see how you get on. And they come back and then they'd do it. And we weren't judging people as to how good they were, but how good they might become. And people like Alex Dandridge, yes, who ended up being able to juggle 7 balls and be totally amazing. He learnt his entire craft on that street. And then there was all the kids that started doing graffiti around the area, and you were tying them in with the street crews and doing but there was a whole sort of way of doing things, which was. And you were there, and we were always listening, and we were always very sympathetic to them. We had a big first aid kit to patch people up and things like that. Yes, and I find that, and it was a great time because there's some seriously well-known performers like Eddie Izzard or Julian Cleary or John Higley or the whole Popticians band. Yes. All of those sort of people.
Stomp.
Yes, all that, out of that. Pookie Snackenberger, yeah, all of them. And the whole idea, I mean, when the Popticians started out, and they would just have all these kind of paper bags and cardboard boxes and God knows what, just making their sounds on the street. A very interesting idea, all new, all coming out of there. And then, I mean, Eddie Izzard used to just stand there and go on about stuff for a very long time. And I go,
people were scratching their heads, and we were all thinking,
yeah, what is that?
I wonder if he's ever going to make it.
But you know what? Also, because we were women, right, and because in a way it was quite good because we could like temper some of the aggro, just simply because people didn't hit us. They hit each other, but they didn't hit us. Because to pretend that the street isn't also a violent place would be silly, as it was. And I used to get buckets of disinfectant and have to sluice out all down the walls because they just were covered in piss half the time and things like. We used to be cleaning out, and also the tramps used to go into the courtyard beside the church and leave old blankets which are absolutely flea bitten. We'd have to remove those. All sorts of things we were actually involved in doing just to keep the whole thing not clean but presentable. Yeah. Which is reasonable,
I mean, there was such a sort of a cross section of stuff happening there. I mean, it wasn't just the jugglers, and it wasn't just magicians. You had. I mean, I remember you booking in some amazing kind of acts from Belgium, and then you had
yes.
And you had the Burundi drummers came through. From Africa.
And a full orchestra.
Yeah.
And things. Oh yes, absolutely. No, because I mean that was really important. One of the things I know, what happened was because we started off by having a season of street theatre, we maintained the season of street theatre, and of course what used to happen is in the summertime the street theatre was on at lunchtime, which is top spot, and all the individual street entertainers used to give us a huge amount of aggravation. Oh, there's a theatre company. Oh, why can't we? We go, no, it's very important that we have theatre in our street. You know, you're just one act. This is a group. They have a different way. They are working together with each other, as opposed to you just by yourself. And this is really, a different idea altogether. So we used to have to take a people used to get a lot of aggravation for this, but you just had to keep your idea of what you were doing in mind, and you had to be quite sensible about it all and keep tabs on everybody. We did as much as we could to sort of like care about people. I mean, some people were genuinely homeless, which was quite difficult for them. And then we used to have amazing, do you remember Christmas dinner?
Oh yes.
On Maiden Lane, there's Rules Restaurant. Rules Restaurant is the oldest restaurant in London, and the guy that ran that loved Covent Garden, and he'd been part of the campaign to save it, and he also loved the street theatre. And at Christmas time, we would set out trestle tables up and down under the portico, and he would cook the most amazing, big, massive turkey, and we'd all sit down under the portico, all street front, and have our Christmas dinner. And people walk past, and go, it's just before Christmas. They wonder what on earth we're doing. What are you doing? We're having Christmas dinner, thank you very much. And things like that. And I used to love it. And then, because you noticed, like, there was the developments, like, you'd have a day that was only jugglers, and we'd call it a juggling convention. And people would come, and so all these jugglers could see each other and see what they were doing and find out, and things like that. So that was great. And we used to have a dance festival, and so all kinds of dance in the street, so people would see all this kind of stuff. And I would think, that really, a lot of people never ever see live performance. And to me, it's just such an important thing to actually do and to witness, to see somebody giving you, and they do give you a performance. It's such a humbling thing and such an important thing that if only one person in a day walked around the corner and saw a show, something they would never normally see, I think, yes, we were doing it. Other times, of course, somebody might be out there on the piazza doing a performance that was so weird I used to hide around the corner for fear of people coming and assaulting me. Say, what is that person doing in the street with a cabbage? And I go, well, it's a piece of theatre. But it's very interesting how people
were important here once.
Yes, it's very interesting. And like, there's a very famous jazz saxophonist called Lol Coxhill, who only recently died, and he was a fantastic improviser. And he would play, and people would come and sort of almost attack me and say, he's not playing music, what is he doing? I said, he's improvising. And they go, it wasn't a tune they recognise. It's amazing how people take it very personally if they feel upset.
How do you feel now that with the way that it's happening in Covent Garden, where you've just got sort of a management structure from the Covent Garden office that looks after these sort of street entertainment? I mean, my feelings are that you can kind of go along there now and see one act and you've seen them all. There isn't that diversity, there isn't that madness, there isn't that risk-taking that used to go on.
Yeah, well, it's all because it's got very bland. I mean, personally, perfectly well that any kind of organisation, sort of public servants or whatever, they should never run the arts. They just absolutely have no understanding or feeling for them whatsoever, and they're always very conventional, and they're worried too much. They want to concern about health and safety, or they just don't have the heart, the absolute, the feeling, what it's really about, what drama is really about. So they would like it to be neat and tidy. And when we were leaving the area, they announced that they would be auditioning performers. And we all looked at each other. What do they know about it? How could they possibly audition? And basically, they would just watch people to see if they were, whether they might be doing something offensive or wrong. You know, that was it. You know, and just thought, no, you can't have that. And I just couldn't. I mean, we never auditioned anybody. If somebody said they wanted to do a show, they could do a show. The intelligent ones would ask us, because we were there as a team, what we thought of it, and we would say. And if they wanted to improve, I mean, really good acts would come on. I remember a guy who was doing a Slackwire act, really good, beautiful act, and he would always come on, put his leg, and he said, Maggie, can you stand up front there? He said, now, what do you think of this? Am I doing it right? You know, people who really care about what they were doing, and they would want you to tell them, and that was great because we would be able to help them. We would be able to say, yes, it looks all right, yes, all right. And of course, the other thing, the other great tradition of the whole thing of street theatre is bottling. Now, let us not forget why people were there. They were there to earn money. Right. So they're there to entertain, but it isn't just. They are about earning money. And when we first started out there, during the time of the street theatre, I'd learned how to do bottling and collecting money for the street shows, always working the audience in and out, coming at them from behind, not in front, always smiling and saying thank you very much, and carrying a huge great black sombrero to gather the money in. And when we decimalised, that was incredible. We went from having 2 shillings, 2 bob bits in, to quid bits in, and we went.
Quid is £1.
Yeah, absolutely. We went from, you know, we quadrupled the money overnight, and as a result, so when the individual performers started to come and get performances, they were obviously, you know, good ones were making good money. And their friends would come and help them collect, or they'd have what we called their bottling speech, which they would then ask for money at the end of their show. As a result of that, they had to put the money somewhere. So the bank on the corner the manager came out to me and said, there's all these people who want to open accounts. Will you vouch for them? And I was standing in the middle of the county. Yes, that is so-and-so, that is his money, yes. That's how it was you could do that sort of thing in those days. So it would be sort of verifying the identity. And of course, the ones that got lots of money used to park around the corner all night in camper vans. And they had proper, you know, they drove about. They did very well indeed. But yes, I mean, of course, it had a whole feeling about it, and how I feel about it now is that, well, on the one hand, it's great that there is a legacy. I do feel that that's good. In fact, what we started was something that was so strong that whether we were there or not now, it carries on. And it's a good tradition, it's a proper tradition, it's an ancient tradition, a very important tradition. In the dark ages when there was no theatre, there was street theatre. You know, whenever there's oppression or anything and there's nothing, but people perform in this, you know, that kind of performance. It doesn't require a massive Arts Council grant. It doesn't require approval or disapproval from the bourgeoisie. You just can perform. So that's very important. It is sad that, if you like, the standard has gone down in terms of the endeavour, right? It's the striving that always gave that street life dignity. It's that effort to do something different, to experiment, to try to do something, to fail, to you know, not necessarily just to entertain, but to get people to think and to understand or to perceive a different politic, anything like that. You know, that there is, and to be hard-hitting and not just, I mean, some people just used to abuse the audience. And people were like, what's all that? You know, why? And why not? You know, and then they'd work against the audience rather than with them. And it isn't just a nice little dream factory. It had a reality to it. And it's just brilliant. We used to get incredible reviews from serious theatre reviewers who come and see certain people because they thought their performances were so extraordinary. And they were, and they are, you know. But there isn't the opportunity now there for performances like yours, right? In other words, for performances that are just a creative piece of theatre, right? A performance that's devised, worked on. Mostly people get on there, do their tricks and get off. And from time to time, even after all these years, I get phone calls. Maggie, could you come back? And I'll go, no.
So Maggie, on that point now,
Yeah.
because we need to wrap up in a few
Yeah.
minutes, alternative arts is still going.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
how long has your organisation Alternative Arts been going now then? That's 70...
70, 80, 90... What about
Anyway, we'll leave
nearly 40 years,
A
John?
long time.
Yes, nearly 40 years, yes.
So what are you doing now? What's Alternative Arts doing now?
Now I'm firmly based back in the East End, right, where I started. I still run all kinds of different kinds of arts events, and they range from things like Alternative Fashion Week, which is a whole idea about young designers being able to show their work out there. We've been running it in the Spitalfields Market, open air, new ideas, things like this. We run a huge photography festival in East London, which is all about photographers finding spaces, different kinds of spaces to show their work, hundreds of them, absolutely brilliant. Things like that. I also am always been a very strong feminist. I'll make no bones about that. So we're developing a whole ideas around Women's History Month and things like this to do. So yes, I've had to stop having ideas. That's the only way I'm going to stop, is just stop thinking and stop having ideas.
That's brilliant. Maggie, thanks very much indeed.